Okay, here we go. We only have 4 weeks left. Then we're gonna go back to Genesis, so we will get to the modern church soon. I've got a bunch of links to the state of things with the church. It's remarkable. It's funny how a church can experience the church can experience both revival and I don't know what you want to call it, decline at the same time. You know, a pruning, let's call it pruning. And I think that may have happened during the COVID period. I'm not sure that was a bad thing, what happened. You know, some of these churches got knocked by 2/3 of their people. And man, I can think of a few of them that I'm not sure that's a bad thing, because I don't know, when a church becomes a mass attraction, I just get suspicious. So I don't know. Anyway, we are going to continue with the 60s and get to today. We've been talking about narrative and the stories we tell ourselves about our own existence, who we are and where we came from, and how that has changed over time in Western civilization and in the United States. And we started with the early period of Western civilization when the narrative was religious, and we were the official narrative of the gatekeepers, let's call them that. The gatekeeper narrative. The gatekeeper was the church, and the narrative was, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and man and woman were created in the image of God. That was the narrative, plus a bunch of other things summarized by the Nicene Creed. And that changed dramatically for the gatekeepers. That changed dramatically during the modern period after, you know, the Enlightenment, when secularism began to take over and displace the religious narrative, the story we tell about ourselves. And it sort of became official with Darwin in 1859. And alongside of that, 10 years earlier, Karl Marx. And that narrative became secular. And with Marx, the historical narrative, the narrative of history, also began to be revised and changed, because that's what Marx provided. He provided a narrative for the meaning alongside of Darwin's implicit nihilism, lack of meaning. There's Marx, who provided this narrative of where history has come from and where it's going, and this inevitability of some kind of proletarian taking of control that results in what he calls a utopia, this kind of utopian vision. It's almost a kingdom of God thing, right? It's almost a theological thing. It's a displacement of the religious narrative of the kingdom of God with some kind of secular narrative of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of earth or something, I don't know. But anyway, with Darwin, that secular narrative was the one that took control among the gatekeepers, because the gatekeepers changed. The church moved to the private sector, and the public sector began this intense, tremendous, overwhelming secularizing process where religion was expunged from the public sphere, government, media, you know, all of it, among the gatekeepers. Of course, populism is another story. What the people on the street think is a different thing. And the people on the street never gave up their belief in God, or that story they tell themselves about origins. And that was the disconnect. And so you'd have a scientific community, which is resolutely atheist and naturalistic, gatekeeping a populist, which is resolutely, if not religious, given to belief in God. So they never really convinced people on the question of origins, and on the question of Darwinism. As far as Darwinism is believed in, but it hasn't displaced belief in God. It's been very frustrating for the gatekeepers in that regard, and you'll see it boil over every once in a while. At the forefront of that frustration is a guy named Richard Dawkins, whom we've talked about before. I was just watching a debate between Richard Dawkins and John Lennox. You can look these people up on the internet, where they're arguing about the existence of God. Lennox is a mathematician who's a strong believer, who's unabashed and unashamed. and very, very good. But you can go up on YouTube and take a look at those kinds of debates. But that still rages today. They haven't convinced their own side, scientists and mathematicians and so forth. But anyway, the point is, after World War II, then that modernist optimism, we're going to make a better world through scientific progress and the making efficient institutions of government and so forth, and improving society along scientific, everything becomes science, right? Including like economics, social studies, and so on. They all become sociologist alongside geologist, anthropologist. Well, I don't know that a sociologist, economist is the same kind of ist as a geologist or a physicist.
So if we call ourselves a biblicist, does that mean
Yeah.
that we're the science of the what?
They're a different thing. And so, but if you want to be taken seriously, you have to become an ist. So that you become an economist. You have degrees for economist and sociologist, and so, there's even like a philanthropist.
It's like a janitor or maintenance engineer.
Activist. It just goes on and on. But anyway, that optimism died, I think, in World War II. When we look back at the disaster that was the first half of the 20th century. And now we begin the second half of the 20th century in a nuclear age where instability, doubt is the name of the game. And so we enter the 60s then with that spirit where the gatekeepers, these secular gatekeepers, it is perceived by that generation, failed. Society is not all that much better than it was. All people see is the problems. And so out of that arises this mess that became known. When you say the 60s, every decade has its own like character to it. Well, the 60s has a character. It's like an inflection point between what came before and what came after, like COVID, right? So the 60s are like that. And one of the things that happened was the arrival of I'm not unique to this, what is called second wave feminism. So what we're going to do, there's all kinds of things we could say about the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. I love all that stuff. I've had my, I have these phases that I've gone through. I can look at my bookshelf and see the junk bond phase of the late 80s when I got all interested in that, and the Soviet Union phase in the 90s. Then there was the 60s phase, the 60s radicalism, student radicalism of the 60s. That phase is on the shelf. It's all these different phases. But the popular culture, the culture wars, their interaction, the effect on the church, all of that stuff, I've never lost interest in. So I follow that astutely, much to the frustration of oftentimes the people that I talk to. But you are influenced by so many things that you don't think you care about, but you had better care, because there's people who are on the other side who want to affect you and your life, and they are fervent in their ambition to do so. We'll talk about that. Anyway, we talked about first wave feminism. Why feminism? Why are we just going to focus in on feminism? And the answer is because feminism in a certain form has captured. There's a process of infiltration, disruption, subversion, and capture that happens in institutions, including the church. And nowhere has anyone been more successful at that than in the world of feminism, because the prevailing morality of the institutions of the United States and the transnational institutions of the world are entirely feminist. And we'll get back to that. The moral framework, the activism, the way of looking at the world, all of it, it has all been captured. And we are in a period where there's now some kind of pushback on it. But that's the reason that we are interested in feminism, which means that today, if you ask, well, who then controls these institutions? from government, let's put aside what's happened since November of 24. Because it's an open question of whether any of that can survive just the what do you call it? The entrenched nature of this. But institutions of government and entertainment and sports and journalism, media outlets, transnational organizations like the UN and so forth. Those institutions, the philosophy, the philosophy of the worldview, the morality, the moral framework, all of that is entirely feminist and Marxist, because that's two sides of the same coin, as we'll see. And so when you look at, for example, entertainment, Hollywood, it's entirely controlled by that mindset. And so that has infiltrated the church dramatically. And we're going to look at some examples of that. But that's why we're talking about feminism. So if this sounds weird, like I'm just obsessed with feminists, that's the only reason. I couldn't care less about them other than that. And you'll see why in a little bit. But feminism has come in, let's call it 3 waves, or maybe in the middle of a 4th wave. The first wave, which we talked about, was the suffrage movement, the temperance movement back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, which eventually resulted in women receiving the right to vote, and prohibition, which was a disaster. That's the result of first wave feminism. Then in the 60s, we see a new breed of feminists arrive. And the goal here is not suffrage, the vote. The goal here is emancipation, liberation, freedom, and so forth. And the names that that you'll associate with that, where do I have that? That's over here. So there's Susan B. Anthony, first wave feminist. Second wave feminism, sexual liberation and female empowerment. There's some names, some of which you know, some of which you don't. I still actually read and listen to 2 of them, Paglia and Wolf, because the second wave feminists are now in a fight with the third wave feminists, and we'll talk about that as well. Because it's third wave feminism that won the world. And we'll talk about why that matters. And the church. The churches that have been infiltrated by third wave feminists, which we'll get back to. But anyway, the 60s saw this arrival of second wave feminism, which was about those 2 things: sexual liberation and female empowerment. And you see books like the Feminist Mystique or Feminine Mystique, I can't remember which one. Betty Friedan, that kind of kicked it off, I think. And then these names like Gloria Steinem and so forth. But that then takes hold, and that begins to march through institutions, mainly academic institutions, and then into subsequently the world of journalism, begins to affect every realm of society, every department of a university, editorial boards at newspapers and so forth. Nothing is left out, because we move from infiltration to capture, and nothing less than total victory is sufficient in this march, what is often called the long march through the institutions, which is a Marxist thing. But anyway, very, very successful. And if you ask the question, when is sort of this is the Emancipation Proclamation. Abraham Lincoln, January 1st, 1863, announced that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious areas are, that would be the South, of course, and henceforward shall be free. That's the Emancipation Proclamation for the slaves. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation for women, from their point of view, was, did I even put it here? I didn't. I thought I did. Roe versus Wade. 1970, it's the only court decision that doesn't need explaining. Everybody knows what it is. That's how important it is in American history. There's a couple, Brown versus the Board of Education, I guess there's a couple. But Roe versus Wade, they all pale in comparison. And that is, in my opinion, from the feminist standpoint, the Women's Emancipation Proclamation. The United States Constitution provides a fundamental right to privacy that protects a person's right to choose abortion. And even though it is claimed that it didn't give that right absolutely, it absolutely did give that right absolutely. And so what is the name, that's 1973. So you're now 10 years into the second wave feminism. And this is the great victory. Why? What is it emancipation from? And it is emancipation. Now I'm just going to state my view strongly. It is emancipation from two things. Number one, men. And number two, that pathogen or parasite that has invaded a woman's womb from their point of view. Now referred to as reproductive autonomy or bodily autonomy in third wave feminism. Bodily autonomy is now what it's called. But they have now thrown off any concern about a negative view of the word abortion. If you remember, you had right to, in the 70s, you had right to life, and then right to life and freedom of choice. Pro-choice, yes. Because who wants to say they're pro-abortion? Nobody wanted to say that because they understand the nature, the violent nature of the act and what it represents. That has been thrown off. There is no longer that stigma.
Can I interrupt for a second, Jerry?
Yeah.
Speaking about Susan B. Anthony reminded me of something. I had somebody from Susan B. Anthony pro-life stop in the church this week looking for me. I'm not familiar with that organization, pro-life. I like the idea. They're looking for people to work for them. Both, some field persons, where you get $15 an hour to do whatever work it is. They're also looking for a full-time director for the local office.
All of these waves of feminism would be at war and are at war with each other. If you Google, I Googled celebrate your abortion. I got this. Shout your abortion. That's a website. Happy birthday to us. We are celebrating our 10th year of transformational pro-abortion work, not pro-choice work, pro-abortion work. Unstoppable grassroots movement. Pro-abortion, says Wikipedia. We're thankful for our abortions. The Nation is a Marxist, at least it was when I was reading it in the 90s, a Marxist rag. Activism, celebrate, here it is, here's the Marxist. What did I just, maybe I just chased somebody away. Celebration of life. So this is the Marxist thing, right? War is peace. Did you see 1984 or read the book? Yeah. War is peace. Hate is love. Just say it. Abortion, a violent act that results in death, is life. You just say it. And you do so without shame or guilt. So this is where we are now in regard to this Emancipation Proclamation that was realized from the feminist point of view in 1973. So it took about 50 years to get there, where it has now come out. The point is the abortion. The act itself has value. It is the sacred ritual. if Christianity's sacred ritual or rite is the crucifixion of Jesus on behalf of sins, abortion is the sacred ritual. That sits at the bottom. Roe versus Wade is the founding premise of modern feminism, of all of modern, and really all of modern progressivism. You cannot get away from it, which is why when Roe versus Wade was overturned in 2022, the movement lost its way. Total disorientation, complete and total disorientation, because the foundation had been stripped away.
You said that emancipation was in their mind from men and from what was in the womb.
Yes,
And so probably could vary from person to person, but how about emancipation from God's word and God himself?
that had already happened. Thank you, Darwin. That had already happened. We'll get back to that in a second. We'll look at that. He provided the framework in which such a thing as this could happen.
And then are any of those, would any of those leaders have, for whatever purpose, tried to reconcile that with God, or to try to call themselves Christians or any of their followers?
Oh, many of them. We'll look at some church. We'll look at what's infiltrated the church, and we'll see that many of them will call themselves Christians. Yeah.
When you put the cross of Christ in comparison to the feminist abortion, made me think that. So they have blood sacrifice too.
Correct. Yeah, that's not an original thought to me. I'm not the first one to notice.
So Satan was behind it all, if receiving all these blood sacrifices.
You cannot be a feminist without being in 2025, without being explicitly pro-abortion. You cannot be. It's impossible. If you find somebody who says I'm anti-abortion, but I'm a feminist, all the feminists are going to cast you out. It's like a Christian denying the crucifixion of Jesus. It's exactly the same thing as that, in my view.
That's what they're calling the fourth way.
No, that's second wave feminism, the 60s. We had the suffrage movement, we want the vote. Now we have emancipation, which is sexual liberation and empowerment. Those two things go together. And part of, you cannot have sexual liberation without abortion, because it has to be freedom from the consequence. That's the definition of, we're talking about a morality now of total license. We move from a Christian morality with a narrative of the Nicene Creed during the pre-modern era and even during the modern era. That has now been cast off by the gatekeepers. And now we have a morality of license, individual license. And then it'll eventually devolve into group identity as well. But that's the feminist vision.
What did you say about 25? Are you talking about 2025?
Yes,
You said, that's the reason I was mentioning fourth wave.
we'll get to that. I'm making up fourth wave. I think we've moved beyond third wave feminism, which we'll get to right now, almost into.
I have a question for you. Do you think the feminists started in the 60s? What about the 50s after World War II got done and a lot of these women that worked in the factory didn't want to stop working in the factory?
Yeah, there were wholesale changes in the American way of life post World War II that of course set the stage, that contributed to what, but a lot of those women are not going to be feminists. They work, but they're not feminists. They stay in the workforce. My mom would be an example of it. Many the other women, they're all over the place. But yeah,
I guess I would consider that a little bit of feminism in the fact that
you can make that, yeah. And even that's a result of the first wave feminism, yeah. It's all cause and effect, little by little. Most history doesn't happen all at once as this unique, innovative thing like the incarnation of God. A transformative event that arrived with no precedent. And even there, you could say there was cause and effect because you have the prophetic word that brought it about. But this utterly unique event that transformed history had no precedent, and nothing before it that was was like it, only less. There's very little of that, and that's the nature of the incarnation of God, and his crucifixion and his resurrection. Unique events with no precedent. Now we're talking about, you can always go back and, there's a pathway to this stuff. And a lot of times the people that do something earlier had no intention and no idea that the thing later would happen. And that is about what we're going to find out about the second wave feminists, because they are not happy right now. So we'll get to that in a second. But I'm all headed towards capture. The next generation of feminists are going to capture churches and ignite a culture war that directly affects everybody in this room, and that we've been raging about for decades, really. Even aside from abortion. Okay, so to summarize then, that's let's see, I think I did it here. So that's second wave feminism. There's some names. These are all the 70 somethings, that you've seen out there. I don't know how old Naomi Wolf, she's a little younger, but anyway, she's got some good podcasts out there. The only reason I know about him is they're not happy with what's going on today in the world of feminism. We'll see that in a minute. But so this is what's happening now in this postmodern period since the 60s, and really since the end of World War II. Postmodern loss of faith in modernism, in science, in what technology can do. Even government institutions like the League of Nations back after World War I. And so now all that stuff failed. It was not able to bring about this world that they all promised, like Star Trek, boldly go where no man has gone before, and so forth. And you can hear the patriarchal nature of that right then and there, right? Where no man has gone before. And even the director of that movie, producer Gene Roddenberry, if he's making the show today, would not say where no man has gone before. It'd be where no one has gone before. But anyway, you see then the fragmentation of society, fracture of family, because what comes with this, of course, is the overthrow of what we will call the nuclear family. Husband, wife, mother, father, kids, all in the same home for 2 decades, right? The disintegration of that, which was not an accident. We'll get back to that. Identity politics, which is to say group identity. And, we're gonna now have political movements based in group identity. That's identity politics, which we've all experienced today, which I'm gonna try to stay away from. I'm only interested, I'm just gonna try to stick to the feminist stuff because that's the stuff that matters to what's happened to the church. And then intersectionality, the word you've never heard, but man, oh man, that's a mouthful right there. Intersectionality, we'll get back to that in a second too. So that's second wave feminism. And it came on with a vengeance in the 60s. All these people became professors at universities. You see whole new departments pop in to universities, gender studies. Then you'll see with intersectional feminism, African American studies, queer studies, pick them, name them, one after another. That's when all that stuff started, and that's all a result of exactly what I'm talking about right here. And there's also, of course, other Marxists that are also doing this, activists that are infiltrating the universities and bringing this about too. But no, I lost my way there. It's the feminists that I want to focus on. Maybe I'm overstating it a little bit, but anyway, this is Dorothy Day. She's a doctor she'd be 60s maybe. The sexual revolution she's doing commentary on it. Is a rebellion against authority, nature, and is a rebellion against authority both natural and supernatural, and even against the body and its needs and its natural functions of childbearing. This is not reverence for life. It is a great denial and more resembles nihilism than the revolution they think they're furthering.
So she's not offended.
Absolutely not. So the point being, there is no greater abortion embodies nihilism and the cause of abortion. Put aside abortion. You know, I understand the scared 17-year-old. Put aside the activism. Now put that aside and just think of the activism. This here. There is no greater manifestation of nihilism in the world today than this right here. Because abortion is the great nihilistic act. There it is. That's why I'm bringing it up. Nihilism. That ultimately, life is meaningless. Thank you, Darwin. Ultimately, and the rest of the naturalists, life is meaningless. You can say what you want and try to get out of it. You can't. Everybody understands the sinking feeling. My life doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what I do. If I live or die. I got a bunch of quotes here that we're not going to do right now. But, you know, we'll get back to nihilism again. We'll never get far away from it. But my point being that abortion is the great nihilistic act in modern culture. So that's Dorothy Day's commentary on the sexual revolution. Emancipation.
Nihilism makes me think that maybe it was like, our world is awful, we don't want more good in it.
There is certainly that strain. Yeah. Especially in third wave feminism. She'd be earlier. She'd be in during the second wave feminism. You can look it up. I forget the date.
That go along with the push for birth control in the third world countries.
Yeah. But you remember overpopulation in the 70s. There's all, you know, talking about now what is China doing? Well, China had a one child rule, right?
So
Forced abortion.
If it was a female, they didn't abort. If it was a male.
Because I didn't want to, I wouldn't, it's not a male and I can only have one. So I got to abort the female and hope the next one's a male. Because I'm given, in their mind, no choice. I'm not given no choice. Well, what are they doing? What is China doing now? They're paying couples to have babies.
Oh.
They've created a generational problem.
Yeah, they're no longer the largest nation in the world, population-wise. It's
Yeah.
now India.
Social engineering, and this kind of amoral way, this just nihilistic amoral way. It's unbelievable. Did you get it?
Late 1800s.
Yeah, so she'd be.
Yeah.
So she was probably watching what was going on during the 60s. Like Chesterton here is watching what's going on post-Darwin as a religious guy, he's a Roman Catholic, and he's watching what's going on, and he's watching this rise of secularism. So this is what he says. Secularists have not wrecked divine things. They wanted to. They wanted to do that. He says, no, they didn't do it. But the secularists have wrecked secular things, which they did. Post-World War II, all through post-World War II, everybody looked back at the ashes of what secularism had accomplished. That's why we went through it, from World War I to World War II. It's just a wasteland. It's a total disaster. That wasn't God. That was secularism.
I wish I'd had that quote in my intro to philosophy class. I remember back in the 80s, I was taking a few classes at University of Connecticut, and that was one of them, and got into a discussion with the teacher because he said, referring to the arguments for the existence of God, the teleological argument that there's a clock, there must be a clock maker,
Right.
had stood strong until Darwinism, and he said Darwinism wrecked that argument. And I said, it didn't.
No, they didn't. No, absolutely didn't. Yeah. Okay. Moving right along. I don't have any notes. I'm kind of just making this up as I go along. Am I right? I don't know.
So what's the distinction between second wave and third wave then?
A time period and certain characteristics about their priorities. So second wave feminism is, I'm gonna narrow it down to those two things. And I may not be right, but I am very opinionated. That's all that really counts.
Never knows that about you before.
Yeah. And I've decided that the great victory, if you ask, what's the great victory moment for second wave feminism? The answer is 1973 Roe versus Wade. And that's their Emancipation Proclamation. Their January of 1863 is 1973.
So when you say that they fell apart in 22, what then?
I didn't say they fell apart.
What did you say?
I said they lost their way.
Oh, lost their way, yeah.
Yeah, disoriented.
What we.
Imagine you suddenly found out that that the crucifixion of Jesus didn't happen. How would that affect you?
Yeah.
You might be a little disoriented,
Yeah,
eyes glazed, not sure what direction to move. That's what happened. For the same reason. These are pseudo-religious beliefs. This is an abortion cult. Look at this language. I mean, you got to be kidding me. This is practically a religious movement. You don't want to, if you want an eye-opening experience, I'm not going to do it. Hit images.
so these titles here, those are a result of that disorientation.
No, no. This is, this may have been, I don't know, this is 2019. This had already, this lack of moral constraint and embracing of moral license had been building and building and building. And even by 2019, they had cast off all sense of the idea that there ought to be any negative perception of abortion. So they dispense with pro-choice and they openly and proudly embrace pro-abortion. And so now they're just shouted from the housetops. Celebrate your abortion, or your 10 of them, or whatever it is that you know. I don't know.
So have you noticed anything that the disorientation has led to currently?
They're having to argue, they're having to go state by state. They're having to go down to the state level and fight these state level actions against abortion. Yes. Yes, which requires a lot more money and a lot more organization.
So, when would you say the third wave began?
Kimberly Crenshaw in 1980 or so. Let's go there now. That's all I want to say about second wave feminism. So now that's second wave feminism. Along comes Crenshaw and some others like her, and we see this idea of with second wave feminism, your affliction, your oppression comes from one direction, the fact that you're a woman. But intersectional feminism, which is third wave, says we need to look at the various directions that oppression comes from. So if you're a Black female lesbian, you have oppression. You have many stories of oppression coming from different directions. And what we need to talk about is the intersectionality of those things coming together in a lived experience. Google that. in a lived experience of one person that nobody can judge. You have to listen to her story. So she can tell you about the various ways in which oppression has affected her from different directions or whatever. Intersectional, that's intersectional feminism. You want to see the language. We don't want to get bogged down on it for long. Safe search strict, yes, please. Movement that recognizes how various social identities such as race, gender, class, and sexuality intersect and create unique experiences of oppression and privilege. That's intersectional feminism. This is going to displace second wave feminism. And the result of that is going to be the rise of transgenderism, which is to say, men moving into the space and taking over, with intersectional feminists cheering them on. While the second wave feminists watch this happen and go, this is what we fought for? This is what so men, we fought all those battles to free ourselves from men and emancipate ourselves. And now we're just gonna welcome them in so they can take over and take our medals on the podium and, you know, wherever walk into our showers and our locker rooms and our bathrooms and take selfies right in front of us and put them up on the internet and shame the women. Yes, that's exactly what you're gonna do. That's exactly what happened. So now there's this kind of fight going on between second wave feminists who are very serious about their womanhood. It's all about womanhood, right? And intersectional feminists, third wave feminists, who I don't know what they are. I don't know how to describe them. There's nothing, the second wave feminists, like the first wave, are coherent and they're internally consistent. And that's why you can sit down with a Camille Paglia or a Naomi Wolf and have a discussion or argument, because you understand what you're both arguing about. But with the third wave feminists, the rationality, we allow men to pretend to be women and then welcome them into our space to take over. I was watching this intro to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, and the cheerleaders were up there. And there's all the cheerleaders. I don't remember who it was, but there's all these cheerleaders, you know, they're all 5'6". This is big old cheerleader. And I looked and I went, oh, you've got to be kidding me. It's a guy. And I just thought, these poor girls, they gotta stand there and be overshadowed by this guy. There's the picture of the guy in the Olympics, the boxer who defeated the girl, and there's this look of him, just pure hatred in his eyes as he's staring her down while she's crying because he beat the crap out of her. And she's walking away crying and he's staring at her, and it's nothing but just pure hatred. It is nothing but the hatred of women, period. End of story. And so the second wave feminists,
1948 gold medal, they stole.
Yeah. So that's what's going on. You've got this now this reaction by the second wave feminists against the third wave feminists, and kind of the leader of that was Janice Raymond, who almost immediately, she's a second wave feminist right here, who immediately said, no, this queer thing where, you know, men are gonna identify as women. No. That's not feminism. That can't happen. Those feminists became known as trans exclusive radical feminists. So if you believe that men, biological men, cannot be women, you're a radical feminist. There's something wrong with you as a feminist. That's the trans exclude. Yes, that's right. We don't want men. Men not allowed. That's right. But no. There's something wrong with that. Trans exclusive turf trans-exclusive radical feminism. So all the second wave feminists, like these, who opposed, you know, this gender, what we're calling gender ideology, who opposed that became now known as not just feminists, trans-exclusive radical feminists.
Which is kind of funny, 'cause I would think that the third wave is more radical.
Yeah.
Well, that's the Marxist thing. You just flip the playbook and you control the words. And so once you get out in front of the words, with the words, you get to define them. And once you define somebody as radical in the mainstream, everybody just runs with it and it's too late.
So basically, if you're, so an example of that would be Bruce Jenner. When all these medalists of American male swimmer in the Olympics, now he's a switch gender, he's a, female, but it would actually, swimming in the female race instead of the male.
Except for Bruce Jenner is adamantly opposed to males competing against females. He takes a very strong, it's interesting, because he appears on, Fox News, he's very conservative in his politics. And yet, I'm not sure that he's actually changed. I think he's more transvestite than he is having been changed. I'm not sure.
Bruce Jenner was made by feminists, women Woman of the Year in a magazine called Glamour.
Wow.
It's been like, what, 8 years?
Caitlin,
Okay.
But he was married, kids, his kids were all grown up now, all of a sudden he decided he wanted to become a female.
yeah,
What was that family that he married into?
Kardashians.
Sorry.
I can't even, I'm sorry, I know that. I'm really sorry I even know that. Anyway, let's move on. Let's just move on so we can get to the church. Third wave feminism then, 1980s, displaces second wave feminism, moves us into, they more and more consolidate their wins until finally, let's call it the first or second, about, not that I'm necessarily seeing a correlation with that, with this part, but let's just say it this way, between 2008 and 2016, the victory is complete. And intersectional feminism has now firmly captured the gatekeeping. They are the gatekeepers. Government institutions, media institutions, entertainment, transnational organizations like the UN, you name it, World Health Organization, European Union, all of it, they have captured all of it. And they take their victory lap with the trans-identifying females leading the way. There's the story about the high school softball, junior, wait, I don't remember how old, not high school, it's younger than that. The junior high out in, girls softball team out in New England somewhere that he pitched for the women, for the girls, he pitched, I don't know how many innings in a row with no hits. And so they won the championship and they're all celebrating. And then the backlash started.
Yeah.
Because everybody found out that it's a kid, it's a male. Just to me, it's an act of humiliation. It's a humiliation ritual for the girls. Put on and fully supported and sanctioned by third wave feminists. Unbelievable.
What's her, the girl's name, Riley, something or another?
Yeah, we're gonna get to her right now.
Sorry.
Let's do her right now. So now we're into some new era where there's now pushback from the third wave feminists because there's these trans exclusive radical feminists, as they call themselves. J.K. Rowling probably doesn't even consider herself a particularly avid feminist. She's just a liberal writer.
See Harry Potter?
Yeah.
She does feminist, but in the sense that, rape is bad, I'm gonna protect her.
Women's rights.
Yeah.
She's a women's rights writer, author kind of person, or novelist. But anyway, so she she unwittingly jumps into the hornet's nest because she refuses to welcome trans females as females. And she wouldn't bow the knee, so, there's all this going on with her. And now there's some new thing happening because in jumps these second wave feminists who are also sick and tired of it. So they begin to push back as well, and they're unabashed about it. They're unashamed. So Paglia jumps in, Raymond already had been. And then this person, where did it go? Who absolutely would not consider herself a feminist. But you know what? You unwittingly find yourself in common cause with people in a marriage of convenience, and that's kind of exactly what's happened. So now Riley Gaines is a conservative, traditional conservative, who was a swimmer,
Former, yeah.
who got her medal taken away by you know what. And so she has been unabashed and unashamedly vocal about this. And now she's taking a bit of a victory lap because she's probably done more for the cause of, for the overthrow of intersectional feminism than just about any of the second wave feminists have, from what I can tell. So, but anyway, that's the lineup. The issue here is that these people have infiltrated the church and through capture have done a remarkably effective job. And so what just happened?
Well, Bible translation.
So for example, we'll close, I'll just introduce this because we only got 3 weeks left. So we want to talk about where the church is for the last 3 weeks. Take, for example, here's the Eastminster Presbyterian Church across the street from the bank that I work at Abbott and Saginaw. Unless they took their site down. This is a church. This Presbyterian is a Reformed church. This is like a Luther spin-off church. This is like a Swiss, not a Luther spin-off, a Swiss, a partner in crime, so to speak, in the Protestant Reformation. So you're talking about a Reformed church from the Swiss tradition alongside the Anabaptists. We believe that this is their statement. We believe that the church must stand by people in any form of suffering and need, which implies, among other things, the church must witness against and strive against any form of injustice so that justice may roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. We believe that the church, as the possession of God, must stand where the Lord stands, namely against injustice and with the wronged, that in following Christ, the church must witness against all the powerful and privileged who selfishly seek their own interests and thus control and harm others. That's PCUSA. Sounds nice, doesn't it?
Sounds nice.
It sure does.
I wouldn't disagree with anything.
So now you go on. Presbyterian Church, Confessional Church. We believe that the scripture witness to God's love for diversity and justice. There's that magic word right there. With a definition of justice that they don't define their terms. I guarantee you, they're not defining justice the way that you would.
Yeah.
As seen in the words of the prophets and as well as the life and ministry of Jesus, we believe that we as a church are called to reflect the kingdom of God on earth. That sounds great. We recognize that we live in a flawed and unjust society and that Black lives are daily exposed to significantly higher risk, physical and emotional risk. We recognize that our Black and brown siblings, brothers in Christ, brothers and sisters in Christ, I don't know, regularly endure racism and injustice, but you can see it, right? Every single one of these churches has a statement like this. This is the bowing the knee before, this is what happens after capture. This is what the church is about. There's no gospel here. That's not what this is about. We affirm this statement of faith. We confess that we haven't always gotten it right. Systemic structural racism. That's the statement of faith. The statement of faith is about systemic structural racism and injustice. That's the statement of faith. No, it's not even social gospel. It's one step further. It's intersectional.
Right.
Yeah, intersectional feminism. It's the idea of the various various directions from which oppression can arise. You have to just listen to the person with the lived experience. That's what's going on here. Were you gonna say something? Yes, this is their gospel.
Yeah.
This is the Presbyterian Church.
And Paul would say Galatians, there's only one gospel.
So we'll look at a bunch of these.
Gary,
Yeah,
way back in 1990s, I started seeing a lot of stuff about what was going on in most of the mainline churches. And the Presbyterian Church started holding these huge meetings, I guess, like their, conventions, like conventions.
yes,
And they were holding ceremonies and Indian ceremonies, American Indian ceremonies, where they came in and they performed their dances and rituals. And the UCC Church, the United Church of Christ, was the first to start doing gay marriages, new age services, all kinds of horrible things. And they were bold enough to start putting this stuff into print so people could know it. And that was when Dean and I left the UCC church. And it was very difficult for Dean because he grew up in this little church here in our town. He had family members' names on the stained glass windows in his little church. But there was no way to keep our money that we would give to the church to keep from going to the main headquarters. I don't know a better way to say it, but the main headquarters. And then they in turn sent money to the, the World Council of Churches.
yep.
And anybody that was joining those World Council of Churches started all this junk.
Yeah,
But
the capture of this began in the 90s.
yes, it sure did.
That's when the
It
capture
all
of these
began.
mainline of the churches began, yeah.
Exactly. And it was such a fast downfall. I was just amazed at what was going on in the early 90s.
We'll talk
Yeah.
about why that is as well, why it happened so fast with these churches. But we got to stop now because it's 10:19. So, all right, thank you.
Have a
Appreciate
great
it.
day.
Yep, see you.
Bye.